Well, the biggest myth is that we think of procrastination as a time management problem, but it's actually an emotion management problem. Okay, let's go back it up and talk about time management. Time is the only non-renewable resource in our lives. And so I treat time really seriously. But imagine someone who procrastinates and say, well, I'm going to do what Tim does. I'm going to get a day timer and I'm going to put things in. Great, good. And the next day you put in workout. And you know what happens. You get to the point in the day, you go, I don't feel like it. I don't want to. I'll feel more like it tomorrow. That's when we see procrastination raising its head. It's not in the time management. You thought about what are my goals? When am I going to do it? All things considered, it's probably best if I do it here. But the time comes and you don't want to. You don't feel like it. We sound like our children, right? I don't want to.
Yes.
No, I didn't ask you how you felt. It's time to do the dishes. And so what we have to understand with procrastination is it's an emotion-focused coping strategy. The path to lowering our procrastination is to find different ways to cope with our emotions.
Hello and welcome to On the Couch with Claire. My name is Claire Rowe. I'm a psychologist, and today's topic I know is going to be of interest to so many of you. It's something that we struggle with on a day-to-day basis and can be really impactful in our lives, and it's the topic of procrastination. And I think I've increasingly struggled with procrastination over the last 5 to 10 years. And I don't know if anyone who doesn't know me that well would think that. I think that they would look at all the things I'm doing, and I'm running different businesses and taking care of kids and launching this podcast, and I'm taking on all these projects and I'm getting stuff done. And so I don't necessarily look like a procrastinator, but I procrastinate weirdly on the smallest of tasks. So I can launch a whole business and build a website in a day, but my phone bill will be sitting there for weeks unpaid. And it's weird because I know it will take a couple of minutes, but I push things back and back and back. So I really wanted to figure out why we do this. And I've gone and found a world expert in the topic of procrastination. Because I think when it's at its worst, procrastinating behavior can impact our careers, our relationships, our mental health, even our physical health. And we all know those feelings of guilt and shame. I mean, it just gnaws away at us. So I'm thrilled to be able to speak with Dr. Pychyl today. He is a retired psychology professor, and he has spent his whole career with his research focusing on understanding why we become our very own worst enemy through procrastination. He has published many journal articles on this. He has co-edited books, and he's also written a very nice, brief, and accessible book on procrastination called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle, a concise guide for strategies to change. He's an award-winning teacher, and he has shared his passion for this topic through his I Procrastinate podcast and a blog on Psychology Today. I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Pychyl. I think this conversation will be really valuable. Let's get into it. Dr. Timothy Pychyl, thank you very much for your time today. It's lovely to talk to you all the way from Canada about this topic.
Yes, it's great to meet you too, Claire. And please call me Tim.
Tim, thank you very much. So I'm so pleased to talk to you about the topic of procrastination, because I think it's such a set of behaviors that so many of us increasingly, I think, struggle with. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that it's a set of behaviors that are pretty exclusive in difficulties to the human species. I don't know whether other animal species struggle with procrastination, do they?
Actually, it's been years since I've seen this research, and you're the first person to ask that in a long, long time. But I've seen research publications about pigeons procrastinating. So I'm not convinced it was the same theory of mind that we're thinking of when we think of procrastination in humans. It may have been the change in the reinforcement schedule or the way the animal is behaving in relation to a change in a reinforcement schedule. But I do think, just as we study personality across various animal groups, including the great apes, it wouldn't surprise me if someday we don't look at whether there's animals that put things off, even though it looks like it's not in their best interest. Yeah.
Mm. I'll keep that in mind when I'm looking at my cat today, what she's doing, procrastinating around the house. So I find this topic as a psychologist just very, very interesting because as psychologists, we're trying to work out why humans behave in a certain way. And seemingly every time I stop procrastinating, I feel wonderful. I get this great sense of relief. So one would
Mhm.
think that, why does this continue to occur? So I find that whole area fascinating. You've dedicated a very long time to studying this. What drew you to this topic in the first place?
Well, I did my graduate work partly in the 80s, then again in the 90s. And I was looking first at stress and coping. And then I was looking at how do we predict people's well-being. And I was looking at things that we often do, like personality. So, what are the things that we have, our traits, and how does that predict our well being? And then I was looking at the doings of our lives, our personal projects. And I was working with a very accomplished psychologist, Dr. Brian Little. So, we spent time looking at this level of analysis about what people do. And what I learned in a nutshell was that through my doctoral work, is that it was the things that people weren't doing that predicted their well-being. And if I knew you had a lot of things on your personal project list that you said were important to you and that you wanted to get done, but you weren't making progress on, I knew where your well-being was. It was in the toilet.
Mhm.
So I remember when I defended my dissertation, my external examiner said, "So what's next, Tim?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to stop studying what people are doing and start studying what people say they were going to do, but never get around to, because there's a story there that's so important to understand."
That's so true. I mean, I talk about that even with the topic and rise of screen use for children and social media. It's not just about the danger of what they're exposed to on social media, it's what they're not doing for the hours that they are on a screen,
Mm,
actually. So, how would you define? Can you give us a simple definition or your definition for procrastination?
sure. It's important we start here. So procrastination starts with the definition of it's a voluntary delay. So if something happened this evening or your morning, as we just talked about in our podcast, which can often happen when you're talking with people across the world on technology, that's a form of delay, but it's not voluntary. We might call that inevitable delay. And then when we set this meeting up, we decided not to do it the very next moment. We purposely put it off to a point in time where it worked for both of us. So procrastination isn't like that. It's a voluntary delay of an intended action, despite expecting to be worse off for the delay. So if the Zoom meeting breaks down, that's not our fault. We're not, as some psychologists say, we're not culpable for that, because we're making this voluntary delay, even though we think this isn't my best interest, because I said I was going to do this. And so that's the definition. I'll say it one more time because it's really
Mm.
important to separate it from other forms of delay. The voluntary delay of an intended action, despite expecting to be worse off with the delay. And we have to give credit to Piers Steele at the University of Calgary, who back in 2007 took the work he'd done for his own doctoral dissertation and published a literature review. And that was the definition we've used ever since.
Hmm. So, voluntarily putting off something, did you say with the expectation that it will be worse? Is that what you
Yes, but
said?
you can never know for sure.
Mm.
I mean, any listener right now is going, no, no, I can remember a time when I put something off and it paid off, like someone else did the job. Yes, we all can. And we hold on to those like nuggets of gold to justify all the other times that we actually repress that it didn't work out. And that's why what's the most common emotion associated with procrastination? Guilt. And you said earlier, gee, when I stop procrastinating, what do I feel then? Relief. And so we know these emotions. So certainly sometimes it pays off, but you know that all things considered, this is not in my best interest.
Mm. So that just jumped out at me because we're putting something off, but we're acknowledging in the moment that we know that we shouldn't be putting it off, yet we do it
That's
anyway.
right.
What are some of the myths that people have about procrastination? I mean, is it that, well, I'm just a procrastinator and that's who I am, or that some people are just born that way? What are some of the myths around it?
Well, the biggest myth where I'd like to start, and there's a bunch. In fact, most of my talks now revolve around myths about procrastination. But the biggest one, most important one, if this is the only thing you get from this interview today, is that we think of procrastination as a time management problem, but it's actually an emotion management problem. We already talked about the two emotions, guilt and relief, right? Or the emotional states, at least. But what happens with procrastination is that we, okay, let's go back it up and talk about time management just a little bit. So I'm fastidious in my time management. If you ever saw my calendar, you'd think I was, you might want to, I might want to enlist your services, you'd think, because every 15 minutes of my day is accounted for. But, you know, time is the only non-renewable resource in our lives. And so I treat time really seriously. How did I spend my time today? How am I going to spend my time? Because this is my life. It's not a dress rehearsal. And so I do this and I do it strategically and assiduously because it's really important to me. But imagine someone who procrastinates say, well, I'm going to do what Tim does. I'm going to get a day timer and I'm going to put things in. Great, good. And the next day, you put in workout, whatever that might be to you, lifting weights or going for a run or both of those things. And you know what happens. You get to the point in the day, you go, I don't feel like it. I don't want to. I'll feel more like it tomorrow. That's when we see procrastination raising its head. It's not in the time management. You thought about what are my goals? When am I going to do it? All things considered, it's probably best if I do it here. But the time comes and you don't want to. You don't feel like it. We sound like our children, right? I don't want to.
Yes.
It's, no, no, I didn't ask you how you felt. It's time to do the dishes. And so what we have to understand with procrastination is it's an emotion-focused coping strategy. And as a psychologist, I'm sure you help clients with this all the time, right? That the path to lowering our procrastination is to find different ways to cope with our emotions. Every nutritionist will tell you there's something called emotional eating. And all your listeners go, oh, yeah, that's right. When I get to the second row of cookies in the bag, I'm not eating because I'm hungry anymore, right? You're filling a sort of hole. Or when I go out doing some retail therapy and I buy yet another pair of shoes, to use an oft-used cliche, it's not that you need another pair of shoes. You're trying to make yourself feel better. And when we put off a dreaded task, what we're trying to do is get a good feeling right now. Why? Because that task evokes an emotion. So for your listeners, I'd say, think about a task that you often put off or you're putting off right now. Like, and what are some of the emotions associated with it? Resentment,
Don't stop listening
frustration.
to the podcast. Don't stop
Yeah,
listening
yeah,
to the
yeah,
podcast.
yeah,
Keep
yeah, yeah,
listening. Do
yeah.
the task
You're still
after the
listening.
podcast.
You won't stop listening now because we got you. Like, because we're talking about everything that you live. Because you're thinking about the task, go, yeah, I'm really anxious about it, or I'm frustrated. I even have it. That shouldn't be my job, or I'm resentful, or I'm really bored. This is the worst task in the world. But nobody wants any of these emotions and all the other ones you might have thought of. And we learn very early in life as children, if I avoid the task, I avoid the emotion, at least in the short term. Ah, that's the problem, right? It doesn't go away. It comes back to bite us on the butt. And that's why you and I are talking about the problem of procrastination, because it's predictably irrational and it is harmful, right? It's never helpful. Even when it's neutral, and sometimes you say, well, it didn't hurt me that much. It didn't help because you didn't feel that relief, for example, you talked about really early in the game. So that's the biggest myth. And let me say it again. It's not a time management problem. It's an emotion management problem. And we need to find different ways to cope with our emotions. And we can come back to that.
Mm.
Now, another big myth is, well, this is one of my favorites. And we kind of talked about it in a sense. I have to feel like it. I got to be in the mood. I need to have to be motivated to do something.
Oh, yes.
Wow. If I had to wait till I was motivated to do something, I'd get almost nothing done,
Yeah,
right?
I often joke that clients come to me and that's why are you here. Well, I'd like to get motivated. I make this joke and saying, well, I've got a jar of motivation here to sell to you. There you go. I mean, it's just, it doesn't happen.
No, no, it doesn't. And it's like well, the joke is need a fire lit under our butt. So we say things like, I work better under pressure. No, actually, research shows we don't work better under pressure. We make more mistakes of omission and commission under pressure. But the thing is, we only work under pressure. So we look at our behavior and say, I work better under pressure because that's the only time I'm working, right? And there's a certain pathos to that we need to recognize because that will fuel our change to say, yeah, this isn't actually a good strategy for me. So this notion of I have to feel like it, that's a huge myth. In fact, motivation follows action. Yeah, it's that
Yeah.
simple. That's
Yeah.
two, there's two myths, but I'll stop there and I'll go back to you.
No, that's great, both of those, because I think so often the intervention, whether it be just an individual trying to help themselves or going to a professional, number one is time blocking and they get the calendar out. I mean, it's the first thing they do. Is right, well, let's
Mm-hmm.
schedule the week. So I
Hmm.
love that you've debunked that. And that's still
Sure.
important, but it's not addressing the first problem.
No, I've
And
sat with psychologists here in my own hometown who asked me to come and talk to them because, yes, clients will say, yep, we've made progress this week, and together you decide on homework you're going to do. And then it comes to the next day, I don't feel like that, I don't want to. So the barrier is still there. Now, let's put another myth on the table that comes from that too. It's inherent in what I said in some ways. Future self will feel like it. You
yes,
know,
that's so true. I might
future,
feel like it next week and I'll probably be better rested and I'll probably be in a better mind state in the future. Yes.
yes. And here's why we think that. This is the work of whom I know this person really well. I'm just blanking on his name. It'll come to me. He's a prominent psychologist at Harvard who's offered us so much in psychology. Wow. It'll come to me. But this psychologist has talked about the fact that we rely on the present to predict the future. And an example that he gives is that imagine your shopping cart when you go grocery shopping when you're hungry. Now compare that to another time where you've just gone out for dinner and thought, I'll pick up a few groceries on the way home. You and I both know your grocery carts look very different. When you're hungry, you got your favorite comfort foods just teeming out of there. And when you just had dinner, you're thinking, we don't need that much this week. We're predictably irrational. We rely on the present and we think future is going to feel the same. I'm satiated now. I'll be satiated in the future. So how does this apply to procrastination? Well, we've already talked about the fact that when we get rid of a task that brings negative emotions, what do we feel? I'm going to go back to what you said so early in this interview. Relief, right? I'm not doing. Now, you said you feel relief when you stop procrastinating. You can
Mm,
also feel relief when you start procrastinating because, hey, I'm not doing that task today. You actually feel pretty good. So now
mm,
you think, how's future self going to feel? Well, because there's this notion of presentism, we're predictably irrational, we think future self's going to feel like it tomorrow. But that's a little bit how we're all crazy, right? That's just
mm,
the way our brain plays tricks on us. So that's
mm.
another big myth. Future self isn't going to feel like it. Yeah.
This is very confronting, Tim. I'm wondering whether humans have always procrastinated, or in the scheme of human history of our species, is this a relatively modern set of behaviors?
Have we always procrastinated? Well, when we look at just even common literature, we don't see procrastination being written about until 17th, 18th century, that sort of thing. But there's always been some sort of notion. Even in ancient Egypt, they had a notion that captured procrastination in terms of there's a time to sow and a time to harvest. You had to plant when the Nile River was in its flood cycle. So people have always recognized that there was a best time to do things. And if you didn't, it came at a cost. But cross-culturally, there's different ways of presenting that needless delay, that culpable delay that we talked about. You have to wonder if, our we talk about this all the time when we think about nutrition, that the reason many of us overeat the way we do is that food is really abundant, and our ancestors for thousands, if not millions of years, lived in a phase of scarcity. And so if there was a lot of food, they would eat it, and that was to their benefit. But that's not the way it is now. Evolutionary psychologists like David Buss say we have a Stone Age brain running around in a modern world.
Mm,
So perhaps the Stone Age brain is playing out here with procrastination somewhat in the notion of a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I could have fun now and save the pain for later, right? Or uh, so this immediate reward, and this is what we're talking about, the delay of gratification in some ways, may have been something that was beneficial to that Stone Age brain. But of course, in a modern world where you and I can book a flight for a year from now, and notwithstanding some of the strife that airlines seem to have, we show up on that day and there's a plane waiting for us. That's astounding, right? That's not the way the world has worked for human beings
mm,
forever. But that means that we have a different decisions to make to fit into a world like that. So is procrastination new? Perhaps not, but in a modern world, it's more problematic.
Okay. Do you think there are any advantages at all to procrastination? Are there any survival advantages in our species or in the modern world? Is there anything that you can say that would advantage anyone to procrastinate on something?
Well, Adam Grant once, 2016, wrote a piece in the New York Times that I often take exception with. Adam's a very talented psychologist who's offered us so much. But with this part, I say, no, Adam, I think you got this one wrong. He argues that certain types or kinds of procrastination will feed our creativity. And I just stop, full stop. No, there aren't certain types of procrastination. There are different kinds of delay. I alluded to that earlier. There's predictable delay, like our Zoom meeting falls apart or a plane is late. There's purposeful delay. There's even delay due to emotional problems, right? There are times in our lives when our wheels come off the track because we're depressed or someone's died or things have happened and our self-regulation breaks down. That's different than procrastination. And when you're truly procrastinating, you're not feeding your creativity, you're running away from things. But there are times when you need to take a break. Delay from writing might be thinking. No, thinking's a good idea if you're trying to write something. So to answer your question more directly, no, in the research literature, we don't see any benefits whatsoever to procrastination. It's tied to so many negative outcomes from performance through to the biggest one, well-being, but even health risks. So no, there's no upside, but we love to make a vice into a virtue. And that's why you'll constantly see in the media some way that, you can eat this chocolate cake and it doesn't make you ill. And you can waste time and it's actually good for you. We just love to read that stuff.
Of course. You mentioned there briefly about the impact of procrastination. So before we go on about trying to figure out how we address it, what impact does chronic procrastination have on our mental health and physical health? How bad can it get?
Hmm. Well, Joseph Ferrari at DePaul University was one of the first people to kind of define chronic procrastinators. Did it cross-culturally by measuring them on a scale. There's problems with taking that technique, taking a single scale and going around the world because things change in terms of how we interpret stuff. But all that aside for the moment, he would argue that about 20% of people are chronic procrastinators. And it comes with a risk, as I said already. You have lower well-being, lower self-esteem, higher depression, and we even see more health problems. Interestingly, Fuchsia Sirwa at Durham University has a whole research program on health, has shown us that procrastination affects health directly through stress. So procrastination creates stress for us, and we all know the impact that has physiologically on our body, chronic stress. But also procrastination is a funny beast in the sense that we have treatment delay and fewer wellness behaviors. So they compound too. They're indirect effects, but oh, I'll exercise tomorrow. Oh, I'll get that mole looked at later. And those things present risks to us as well. So chronic
Mm.
procrastination does all those things. And on top of that, I would argue existentially that we see a real problem in relationships with others because people don't trust us anymore. They don't like working with us for sure. And later in life, I've listened to clinical psychologists talk about the regrets of those who are grieving. And at one conference I went to on this regard, I pushed the presenter to say, what kind of regrets do these people have? And not surprisingly, it was doing the things they said they were going to do with loved ones and they didn't. Right. And that's
Mm.
why I say, my life's not a dress rehearsal. Right? If you don't do these things now, you may not get a second chance. And of course, that means that procrastination is not just a matter of a few all-nighters. It's a matter of getting on with your own life itself. And to me, that's profoundly important when I think about what's the effect of chronic procrastination. It's not engaging with your life.
That's so true. And just listening to that, I think one of the questions that many people will have is, was I born like this if I am a bad procrastinator? Are there certain personalities, dispositions of people that just tend to be more vulnerable to engage in these behaviors?
The answer is yes. As you know, this is your background. Every personality trait is nature and nurture dancing together. It's not nature versus nurture, but via. They always work together. And about 50% of the variance, as we like to say as research psychologists, we try to predict how much we can understand in a phenomenon by how it varies. And can we predict how it varies? Well, when personality varies, we say 50% of that variance we can understand from biology, genetics, right? You come into the world with a propensity to be some way. And
Mm.
then the rest of that is nurture, how the life events that shape you. So let's take procrastination specifically. One of the major personality traits that predicts procrastination is a lack of conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is one of the big five traits in personality. You'll remember these as conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. For a Canadian, that's wonderful. It spells the word canoe. I love the canoe. But conscientiousness is the lack of self-discipline, dutifulness, organization. And it has a very high correlation negatively with procrastination. So the lower your conscientiousness, the higher your procrastination. So the deck is stacked against you a little bit if I walk into your room and it's an ungodly mess, right?
Mm.
Because you can't put things away. And if I ask you where things are, I don't know. And do you keep a calendar? No, it's not what I like to do. Well, yes, you're set up a little bit. Another one is neuroticism, not as strong a relation, but it's a predictor. The more anxious I am, the more worried I am, the more likely I'm going to procrastinate. Well, why? Because of that emotional content coming through.
Mhm.
And the last one I'll talk about, and they're just three of the major ones, is impulsivity. If you're a really impulsive person, of course, you face something you don't like, I'm out of here. I can't keep the seat of my pants on the seat of my chair. Now, that's all there. And you might say, yes, you just described me.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I'm the perfect storm. And you said, I'm doomed. No, biology isn't destiny. Personality isn't destiny. It's nature and nurture. And we can act out of character. We can learn to behave differently. It does take effort at first, much like learning anything, but then it becomes second nature. Notice we say second nature. And most of you will
Mm.
say, well, yeah, I'm familiar with, we often use that. Yeah. And why do we use it? Because it's not what comes naturally, but when it becomes second nature, you do feel like it's your own, you're living in your own skin. Now, I want to move on from that because, so how do you do that? Well,
Yes. How do you do that?
yeah, this is so profoundly important to me. Like, this is why I took time to meet with you tonight or for you in the morning, is that this message is so important. I've said you're not going to feel like it. Future self isn't going to feel like it. In fact, that work I was trying to describe about presentism is the work of Dan Gilbert at Harvard University. It's always nice to give credit because he's just a giant in the field, and other people might want to look up some of his work. He's written some very interesting books on happiness as well. So future self isn't going to feel like it. We don't have to feel motivated. It's an emotion focused coping response. So, okay, I've got my day timer. I've sat with my personal life coach. I've set my goals. I've used the whole SMART technique. They're specific, they're measurable, actionable, all those things. And then my whole body's screaming, I don't feel like I don't want to. There's the hurdle. Now, everything that matters happens now.
Mm.
So you have to keep it focused and small. First, I would argue, and this comes from the mindfulness literature, I can have an emotion without being that emotion. But I have to first recognize it. I recognize, yeah, I am really frustrated that I even have to do this task. I'm actually kind of angry. And at the same time, ironically, I'm a little bit worried that I can even pull it off. So I've got all this flood of negative emotions. So the next one is I have to accept the fact that I have these. And I love the words of Joseph Goldstein, who's quite a prominent meditation teacher in the US. He says, it's okay to feel this way. This is, to me, a profoundly important thing to say throughout my day. It's okay to feel this way. Because, the brain is meant to do two things: think and feel, think and feel, think and feel. And the Buddhists will tell us, yeah, monkey mind. Yeah, and it's true. Just watch your mind for a while and you go, I am completely crazy. And even now, as you're listening to me talk, you're thinking about four or five other things and you've had all sorts of feelings. Yeah, you do. But you don't have to be those things. You have them. You don't have to be them. Now, that's setting the groundwork, right? You're recognizing, you're accepting, You're going to investigate them. I would argue this too. And this comes from the work of Tara Brach, a wonderful meditation teacher. If you want to explore this further, go to her website, tarabrach.com. This is called RAIN. We've done our A, and I is investigate. But investigate doesn't mean think about why I'm like this. Oh, yeah, it's my parents' fault. No. Investigate means like, what does it feel like in your body? What does it feel like to have this anxiety or resentment or frustration? It's quite amazing because as you investigate, it goes away. Like it's hard to hold on to a feeling or any sensation. So just investigate it, let it happen. And then, of course, the last one is
It's
go ahead.
paradoxically, isn't it? Because I often talk to young people about that notion of accepting a feeling
Mhm,
and use the
mhm,
example of, what are feelings in themselves and how do they occur in the brain. If we break that
mhm.
down, it's putting it simply for young people, it's a chemical release in your brain. So at the same time, if you could stop the blood running down your left leg for me, that would be really good. It's such, you cannot do it. And they look at me and I say, well, you can't do it. So
Mm.
paradoxically, the more you resist that emotion and push it away, the more it keeps coming, isn't it? So it's befriending that feeling and accepting it.
Accepting it. And that means accepting being human. Like it's part of self-compassion. And so I'm putting all this in one big ball. And any of you that are taking time to work with a therapist, I'm hoping you'll see that a lot of these things are things that you're doing now. So the root out of procrastination are some of the foundations of the kind of work you do in psychotherapy. But here, I'm going to give you just an actionable thing now because you can say, okay, long term, I'm going to work on having and not being. I'm going to try to accept and not identify with. But I'm going to give you a really practical strategy now. Then I want you to ask a simple question. What's the next action I would take on this project if I was going to do it, but I don't want to? I recognize that. I'm saying no ways because I'm not throwing myself in the deep end. I just say, what's the next action? And keep that action as small as possible. So, for example, I might have to do something on my computer, like write a letter to someone that I really don't want to write. And I think, well, what's the next action? I just have to open my email and look at that one email. I'm just going to read the email about what they want. I haven't said I'm going to write a letter. But you see, if I keep it that small, I think, yeah, I can do that. And it primes the pump. And on good days, honestly, that's all I have to do. And all of a sudden, I'm doing. Because you see, now I'm doing, I'm not running away. Now, on really bad days, I might have to ask that question, what's the next action? Oh, 100 times. But at the end of the day, I look at my day and go, wow, I didn't really like today, but I got everything done. And that makes me feel really good. I'll go back to what you said earlier. I feel relief that I didn't just blow off my day. I feel relief that I lived up to the person I want to be at the very least. But actually, sometimes I can turn the corner and I can just celebrate. In fact, see, I didn't have to feel like it to do it. And oftentimes during the day, it transforms from avoiding to approaching. So, yeah, this is so profoundly important.
I like that word approaching actually, rather than having the expectation of completion of the task, but approaching the task sounds
Mhm.
far more doable. And I think one of the other, maybe it's an excuse we use or reasons to procrastinate, is waiting for things to be lined up and perfect. I mean, I had an idea to do a podcast for years and I was waiting for the right equipment and the right guests and the right format. And I just delayed it for so long rather than
Mhm.
taking imperfect action. And potentially we'll look back and think, oh, goodness, that first attempt was terrible. But it would never have happened if I'd waited for it to be perfect. Is that also a type of procrastination?
Oh, it's so important. In fact, I do lots of work with very accomplished individuals in society. In fact, sometimes I'm invited to groups of people and I think, what in the world could I help you with? You're the most accomplished people I've ever known. But a topic they resonate to is perfectionism. And Gordon Flett, amongst others, Fuchsia Searwell, who I've mentioned earlier at Durham, Gordon Flett's a Canada Research Chair at York University. He's done work on perfectionism and procrastination. And lo and behold, the more you're a perfectionist, the more you're going to procrastinate. But there's different flavors of perfectionism, he would argue. As much as I didn't want to make different flavors of procrastination, he does that for perfectionism. He says there's self-oriented, just like to do a good job for myself, internally motivated, and I don't stress over it. I just try to do my best. It doesn't seem to be too harmful. In fact, you procrastinate even less if you that way, if we in the research. But then there's this socially prescribed perfectionist. That's someone who's trying to live up to the unrealistic demands of others, or even just the internalized beliefs of what they think of you. You haven't asked them, but you think, oh, they expect me to be perfect. That immobilizes us. So if you're a socially prescribed perfectionist, you're more prone to procrastination. And you can know the difference between that and the self-oriented if you have that little cartoon character on your shoulder going, you should do that better. I know you could do that better. Then you're in trouble.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, Tim, in recent times, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about this. Obviously, we've got a tech-driven world at the moment, and we've never had more opportunities to be distracted. I'm not sure about the interplay between the concept of distraction and purposeful delay, but we've never had more opportunities for that. And I'm wondering what role tech plays in procrastinating. And I mean, this is a big question, but interweaving in recent years, working from home after COVID-19, the way the world has changed, are those things increasing levels of procrastination in people?
Yeah, you're right. That's a big question. So certainly we live in a distracted world. Back in 2000, I worked with a student who studied procrastination and technology use. And thinking back, that's 24 years ago, actually 25, because we collected the data in 1999. At that time, students didn't have laptops, they had no phones. And to use a computer, they had to go to a computer lab. That was quite an intentional act. Yet even then, 50% of the time that they are online, they were procrastinating. They reported procrastinating. Imagine how that has changed now. And people self-report this all the time. They live with a screen in front of their faces. It's a caricature of all of us now at almost any age. And one of the things that's happening there, and trying to think of another researcher's name, and I can't at the top of my head, but the idea here is that we've got this Stone Age brain, as I talked about before, running around in a modern world where distractions are everywhere and that there's no chance you're ever going to get bored because something more interesting is just a click away. And so this is a recipe for continued procrastination. Everyone said to me before, well, didn't you procrastinate when you were at university? Absolutely. But you got to remember when that was in the 1970s, we photocopied things then. There was nothing else to do. And at some point, you just like, I guess I should do my work. But that's just not the case anymore. And then you get into some very addictive behaviors for emotional coping. You can binge eat and you can binge watch things. So,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I don't have to go on at any length because I think everyone's nodding their heads at this point saying, yeah, I've given talks again. Even a decade ago. I remember working with students and someone said, Dr. Pychyl, I don't know if this is a problem or not, but I spend about 6 hours a day computer gaming. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Do I think it's a problem? Just if 6 hours a day, if you did something else for 6 hours a day, you could be in the Olympics, for goodness sake, right? You could be
Mm.
anything you want to be, but what you're doing is just putting away your time. So yes, this is a very big problem. And people who study this, there's some very good recent books on this. One is This Distracted Mind is the title, I believe. He argues just simple things like put your phone away. You have to preempt that which tempts. And this is the harshest medicine, I really think, that most of us really can't even fathom that idea. But that's why there's even apps that will lock you out of the things you're trying to avoid. And so, in this sense, we're using what some people call external will. Like we externalize our willpower. And it's a really, let me just spend a second on this. If I said to you, Claire, what's 3 times 3? You just blurt out 9. And if I said, what's 867 times 933? You wouldn't be so quick, most likely, to do that. But if you said, give me a calculator, I can do that, or give me a paper and pencil, I can do that. Well, that's external cognition. We're using tools to think. Well, ironically, we think that willpower has to be only internal. And I want everyone to listen carefully to this, that we think, oh, I have to just have enormous willpower. And if I don't, I'm going to fail. It's another way of thinking, I'm just a procrastinator. We might come
Mm.
back to that one yet too. But we can externalize things. So I, for example, would never let a friend down. I know that about myself. I say, I'm going to meet you at a certain time, I'm going to meet you. but I cannot go to the gym. I said, I don't feel like it. But I said, oh no. I said, I'm going to meet Claire at the gym. Ah, so I'm leveraging my willpower. And you can do this in so many little ways. In fact, you probably are all familiar with the wonderful book called Nudge. It's been out for quite a long time now, and it was written by a Nobel Prize winning economist and another author. And they argue that, we need the world around us to nudge us in the direction we need to go, not to depend on our willpower, because that's not going to happen. It's like wanting to feel motivated. I've got a jar of motivation here and a jar of willpower there. No, because someday you're going to get to the bottom of both those jars. And instead, you need your environment to help you along. So those are some other answers to that question with what's happening in this modern world. While the Stone Age brain needs some help externally because the deck is stacked against us.
Yes, and I think the deck is stacked against us very much so, and exponentially so. I like the book Stolen Focus by Johann Hari about that. And I think he describes that we're drinking from the fire hose of information coming at us. But
Hmm.
as far as its intersection with procrastination goes, it's there as a smorgasbord for us to choose from, that things we'd
Yes,
rather
that's
be
right.
doing in the moment, rather than,
Yes.
as you said, describing at university, saying, well, there wasn't much else to do. So we just got on
At
with
some
it.
point, you'd face yourself and you'd haul off and do it. And you don't feel that need. And it's really, it's sad to watch. And we can watch it in ourselves and we can watch it in others if we have children, that at some point in an evening, you go, no, oh, now this is another principle. If someone says it'll only take me a minute to check my email, I think, oh, watch that slippery slope because you're making a rational decision over an irrationally short period of time. It will only take a minute. Yeah, that's true. But a minute later, you face the same decision. And 3 hours later, you wonder why you're watching a video of a kayaker getting hit by some other, and you think, well, I didn't even start to look for this thing. No, because it was
Yes.
just this slippery slope. And then what happens? You say, well, it's too late to work on that now.
Oh
And
my goodness,
that
yes.
just repeats itself over and over again. And then I use that word pathos. There's a sadness to that, that
Mm.
we be not authoring our own lives. And I know that people who are still listening to this are saying, yes, I want to be the author of my own life. How can I do that? And I go back to simple first principles of what's the next action? Because it's at that precipitous moment where I think I could walk away, I have to find that tiny little action. Because once I make it, I feel empowered. I think I did it.
Mm.
I can do the next little action. Yeah, and it sounds like something your grandmother would say, but psychology says, yeah, your grandma was right. Break it down into little steps. Yeah.
Yes, and I think that that's a nice differentiation from goal setting, because I think goal setting also is probably over relied on, because most clients I find can set goals in terms of they know what they want.
Hmm.
Maybe it takes a little bit of unpacking, but within a short period of time, they can set a goal. They know I want to accomplish this task, or I want to do this thing, or get fitter, or I want to accomplish something in my career. So it's not that per se. And then they go through, as you mentioned previously, they know the SMART system, and it's specific
Hmm.
and it's measurable, and they do all that, but it's still not the answer to things. And goal setting, certainly those theories do encourage us to break things down. But what I'm hearing from you is I don't think people are breaking it down far enough. It can be about
Well,
opening the laptop.
yes, no, that's right. They're not breaking it down far enough on one hand, but on the other hand, they'll break it down. And I have a cartoon about this. I did a cartoon strip for a while. I was laughing when you're talking about the podcast because I started podcasting before the equipment was any good at all. And if you go back to some of my earlier podcasts, you'll go, well, what the heck is that guy doing? Well, I was getting the information out there, and the equipment followed me. But I did a cartoon at the same time because it's difficult to disseminate ideas, right? And one of the very first cartoons was about this idea that I've made a list because I'm freaking out. And then my friend comes to find me later, I'm watching TV. Well, I thought you were making a list and getting a planner together. Yeah, my daytimer says I start tomorrow. Right? Like we can think that work of breaking it
Mhm.
down is the work. No, no, it's not. But what happens there is that we get a sense of control, and that calms us down emotionally. And we're just giving in to feel good. It's all about I want to feel good right now, as opposed to no, I want to get the work done right now. I want to
Mm.
make the effort right now. And you grabbed onto that. I'm going to move in that direction of approach, not avoid. And it doesn't mean I'm going to get it all done. And so I love the Nike slogan, just do it, but that overwhelms me. So my favorite is just get started. Getting started is magical. It is just magical. But sometimes we have to just get started a few times, right? Yeah.
I love that slogan for a slightly different reason, being that I love the word just in there. If the slogan was do it, that's a bit
Yes.
kind of confronting and someone's telling me to do something. That word just is kind of for me telling you to take the over analysis and emotion out of it and just do it.
Yeah, live
um,
it. Just yeah, just
yeah.
just well. This is a near and dear story to my heart. And in fact, one of my friends, a philosopher at Utrecht, who also studies procrastination, sent me a t-shirt. And I'll tell you what the t-shirt says in just a moment. For many years when I was younger, I studied Zen Buddhism. And Zen Buddhism has many stories and koans in it. And one of the stories is that a monk went off to a different monastery to study, and he ran into the master and said, "I'm here. Teach me." And he looked at him and said, "Have you finished your breakfast? Have you finished your rice?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Then wash your bowl." And you could put the word just in there if you want. And then, so the t-shirt that my friend got me is wash your bowl. Because for me, it is a touchstone for me in my own life. And it's quite realistic. If I look just this way from where I'm sitting, I'm looking at my kitchen and my sink is there. And every single day I face the same task. You have to wash your bowl. And if you treat it as just, then you don't bring all that emotion and thought with it. But every single morning, I'll tell you, I'm just a human being. I can feel resentment. Like, why had other people not washed the bowls? And why am I just washing your bowl? Like, I could just wash my bowl. And then I realize, monkey mind, Tim, yeah, is this going anywhere? Wash
Mm.
the bowl and move on, right? Put it down. And I hope that what your listeners are hearing here in terms of how you get past procrastination are these things that actually make us whole as people. They engage us deeply in our own lives. And then the procrastination just falls away, right? Yeah, ironically, it's not the issue to be solved anymore because you're too busy living.
Well, ironically, too, what I'm hearing is that in a micro level or in the moment, it's about control and asserting ourselves that we're not going to wash the bowl and we're going to choose to do something else. But then on the longer term, we're actually completely not in control because
No,
we're going down the rabbit hole watching cat videos on YouTube 3 hours later, and we're not in
yes.
control at all. And we think we are, and
Well,
we're telling ourselves in the moment we are, but we're not in control.
and there's
So,
another flip side to that, that people will sometimes just say to me, particularly if I show them my calendar, they'll use an old Freudian term saying, "You're so anal retentive, like you have a problem." And I'm thinking, no, this gives me freedom because this is how I'm authoring my life. And then if you say to me, "Tim, can you do this? Do you want to go to a movie tonight?" I can put it all down because I'm always up on things. And I know I can take a block and move it and know it's going to get done because I know I have that sort of agency. And other people say, well, it's not spontaneous. Actually, it's everything. It gives me spontaneity. And there is an irony there that's worth thinking about because you're absolutely right. The people who think, no, I just want to live in the moment. If you look at what you're living in the moment for, you're actually just twiddling away time, often running away from the things you're thinking and feeling. And procrastination is that. Yeah.
mm. So I'm not sure if we can summarize things, but let's come down to a few takeaways for our
Yeah.
listeners and practical takeaways. And there's been already so many that you've mentioned. But for anyone listening to this and they want to jump off this podcast now and really take a
Mhm.
moment to think, what can I start implementing today to
Mhm.
try and stop this awful feeling of a lack of control, because it's awful and it eats away at us. And I find that even when we're doing the thing that we find we've chosen to be pleasurable and we're watching Netflix, there's the gnawing at the back of the brain. That's an awful feeling that you can't actually fully be present and enjoy that because you should be doing something else. And I think so
Yeah.
many people relate to that. So, for anyone listening, on a practical level, what can they do simply today?
Sure. I'm going to pick up on your word implementation in just a moment. But I want to take everyone back to something I said earlier. because you described a situation that makes a lot of us squirm. Like here I am almost feeling compulsive that I can't drag myself away from my phone or the television set or food, for example. And that's an awful feeling because you don't feel like you're in control. I want you to go back to that line from Joseph Goldstein. It's okay to feel this way. It's only human. Like you have to have some self-compassion and you
Mm,
have to start there and recognize I'm only human. It's okay to feel this way. I don't have to be that. Now, the implementation part is this, and I liked your reflection on goal setting because we can all set goals. But what we need are not just goal intentions, but something that Peter Gollwitzer calls implementation intentions. I'm going to do a little riff on your idea. What can listeners implement right now? Well, they can implement implementation intentions. So let me explain that. A goal intention might be, and this is one I always use because it's true. It happened in my life. My dentist said, Tim, you need to floss your teeth. Like you're developing gum disease, and I'm losing my instruments in there. And every time I touch you, you're bleeding, and that's gross. And I thought, yeah, I should floss. But you know what? I didn't want to. I was like a 6-year-old. I don't want to. I don't feel like it. And then I would also forget about it as well. So Peter Gollwitzer's idea as an implementation intention is my goal was to floss my teeth, but the implementation intention was this. In situation X, I'll do behavior Y. So situation X, what was situation X? Well, I did have a good toothbrushing habit. So when I pick up my toothbrush, then I will put the floss on the counter. So I had something in the environment to cue my behavior. When I
mm,
pick up my toothbrush, then I will put the floss on the counter. When I put down my toothbrush, I will pick up the floss. Wow, that was revolutionary for me. Now, some of
mm,
you are thinking, you floss after you brush. I changed that, but I needed to leverage that first by that habit. Women who were told by their doctors to do breast exams and just made a goal intention to do breast exams, the number of people that did that were nearly zero. When they made an implementation intention that as I'm toweling off after my shower, then because it fit the situation.
mm,
I wouldn't say I will take my medicine after I read a book. Like that doesn't
mm,
have any makes any sense. Now, in the situation X, I'll do behavior Y can be a powerful thing in just about everything that you do, even if it's as small as in situation X, when this next episode ends and Netflix is going, next episode starts in 3 seconds, then I will hit the off button because
mhm,
you've made a pre-decision. You're not waiting for future self to do that because future self is just going to let it go. You've made the pre-decision to act. Yeah, implementation intentions I have a lot of use for as a cognitive strategy to harness our better selves that way. Yeah,
mm,
and implementation intention too can be also paired with externalizing willpower. That if my goal is to take a run in the morning, I put my running clothes right at the side of the bed. So like when my feet hit the floor, I hit the running shoes and I go, oh yeah, I'm going for a run. And then I have to think to myself, because you're going to say, I don't feel like I don't want to, just step outside the door and start moving. Now, the crazy thing about human beings is that 3 or 4 minutes later, you're on the trail and you're thinking, I could do the Boston Marathon this year, if that's a North American reference, of course. Because we are this predictably irrational. We go from not being able to do it all to illusions of grandeur. And again, then I loved your laughter. And I hope listeners know that's what we need to do inside of ourselves too, laugh at ourselves, laugh at the monkey mind and go, isn't it amazing how crazy we all are? Yet I can author my own life by
mm.
just putting together some of these techniques, right? The magic is in that mindfulness that you're approaching things with. Yeah.
Tim, do you procrastinate at all?
Not anymore at all. It's kind of a remarkable thing. And I
Wow.
know that seems like a bold statement, but what I'm careful to do too, I've told you I have all these strategies. And don't think for a minute that maybe this would be an unfair characterization, but I'll say, don't think for a minute that Tim's the most emotionally well person you're ever going to meet. I have anxieties and worries, and I can go into dark places. And then I have to pull out these things. I own everything I've talked about today. It's okay to feel this way. I can have these emotions, not be these emotions. Another thing I practice and you could do right now, as soon as I start to have those emotions, I take 2 or 3 really big, deep breaths physiologically. And you can talk about this if you want in the terms of the vagus nerve, but this just calms you down. If you just try this as you're listening, you take 2 or 3 breaths over the next minute while I'm doing this, you'll feel your whole body relax. Well, that gets you in a place where you can try the next step, which is to say, I recognize my emotions. So that's happening. But the other little twist to it is this, is that I'm really careful about the intentions I set. I'm really realistic. And I use my calendar, not a to-do list. A to-do list is more like a wish list. Oh, I wish I was the kind of person who cleaned the garage. Instead, if it doesn't go on my calendar, I realize this isn't going to happen. And so my calendar really reflects me in a profound way. And then I don't procrastinate because I didn't put it in there. I don't have that intention. I don't intend to do that. Yeah.
Well, this gives everyone the message that this is very changeable behavior. And that's what I love. I love giving people the message that you don't have to be living the way you are. And I love that saying that you're under no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago.
Hmm.
And if something's not working for you, you can change it.
Yeah. Let me give you a really concrete example
Mm.
because I think people get a funny idea about people who they listen to on podcasts. And because, well, I do think some people on podcasts think they're larger than life. But just before you and I got together, it's evening here. I had dinner with my family, and I had a cancer a few years ago that was really devastating to my body, and I lost a lot of muscle mass. So recently, I've been trying to put it back on. I like lifting weights like I like punching myself in the face. I used to love lifting weights, but I'm 68 now. But I said to myself, Tim, just go over to the weights and pick them up and just move the weights, right? And after the first set, I thought that felt pretty good. And then I did the second set. But this goes on all day long. When you ask me, do I procrastinate? I'm not trying to be facetious. I have a battle lots of times with the same things we've talked about through this whole
Mm.
thing. And the reason I don't procrastinate is because I pull out all the strategies. And I also use the externalizing of the willpower because I leave the weights right in the middle of the room. Like there they are. They're not hidden. They're looking at me. But we all struggle. And that goes back to this common humanity and self-compassion. We're no different. And we can be the people we want to be. It's just one step at a time. Yeah.
Dr. Timothy Pychyl, thank you so much for your very generous time and your expertise today.
It's a pleasure meeting you. And thanks for the invitation to join you down under, as we say.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving up your valuable time and joining me today on the couch. If today's conversation spoke to you, consider sharing the love and send it to someone you know who needs to hear it. Don't forget you can watch this full episode on my YouTube channel. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, all I ask is that you hit that subscribe button. It helps us to be able to deliver bigger and better content to you absolutely free of charge. If you've got comments or questions about today's episode, head on over and come hang out on Instagram where you can follow and contact me. Okay, stay curious, stay connected, and join me next time on the couch. Take care. Okay, for those who've made it this far, just remember, even though I am actually a registered and qualified psychologist, this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional individual advice.